Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. Tibbix's shoulders ached as he jostled through the multi-species crowd, fighting his way toward the front stage of the 1000th Galactic Confederation reunion. This iteration of the normally tedious and ceremonial event had drawn representatives from every member species to the administrative core world of Tenacious, all because of well-substantiated rumors that the unthinkable had occurred. The collective hive mind was poised to shatter the millennium of galactic peace and declare war against the humans. The sea of alien bodies seemed impenetrable. Tibbix's emerald skin glistened with exertion as he ducked beneath the lumbering arm of a Draxian diplomat and sidestepped a cluster of floating Vorons. Standing at barely 4 feet tall, Tibbix was disadvantaged in this dense throng of galactic delegates. His slender frame, often compared unfavorably to humans, whom his species resembled in basic silhouette, lacked the unnecessary muscle mass to push through more effectively. His large, black eyes, evolved from the dim swamps of his homeworld, darted frantically, seeking gaps between alien bodies. While humans might bulldoze their way through such a crowd, Tibbix was forced to rely on agility and opportunity, slipping between legs and around torsos when openings presented themselves.
"Excuse me?"
he wheezed, his universal translator converting his voice into the standard galactic tongue. A towering Mrovian glanced down, annoyed at the interruption, then reluctantly shifted to allow Tibbix passage.
"Much appreciated,"
Tibbix murmured, though the Mrovian had already turned away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of jostling and apologizing, Tibbix squeezed between the final row of spectators. His breath caught in his throat as the grand ceremonial stage came into full view. The magnificent dome arched overhead, constructed from Aldarian crystal that had been cultivated over centuries to achieve perfect acoustic properties while remaining visually transparent. The dome captured the light from Tenacious' red sun and refracted it into a soft, ambient glow that eliminated shadows without causing discomfort to any species' visual organs. The stage itself was a semicircle platform hewn from a single piece of Neovian marble, quarried from the sacred mountains of Neovia before that world was tragically lost to a supernova 3 centuries ago. 3 ornate lecterns stood in precise arrangement, 2 identical ones positioned equidistant from the center, representing perfect balance, and a third, more distinguished lectern, positioned directly beneath the apex of the dome. The symmetry was deliberate. Tibbix knew, a physical manifestation of Aldarian philosophy of cosmic equilibrium that had maintained the Galactic Confederation for a millennium. The lecterns themselves were masterworks of superior tech, capable of instantly adjusting their height and configuration to accommodate any delegate regardless of physical form. Each was equipped with an array of sensory interfaces to facilitate communication for species that did not communicate through sound or visual displays. Behind each lectern, holographic banners undulated, displaying the ancient symbols of peace and cooperation in scripts from 1,000 worlds. The stage was designed to humble, to remind all present that their shared commitment to coexistence, regardless of biological origin or evolutionary path. At the central lectern stood the Aldarian mediator, already present and preparing for the momentous encounter. Tibbix studied the ancient being with curious eyes. The Aldarian's skin was the color of storm clouds, neither purely grey nor silver. The old being stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a frame that appeared simultaneously frail and immovable, like a reed that bends in the wind yet never breaks. The mediator's 4-fingered hands moved gracefully as they arranged various ceremonial items on the lectern's surface. The speaking stone of Craxus, the flame of perpetual understanding, and the ancient text of the original Confederation, preserved in a stasis field. Each object represented a cornerstone of the peace that had endured for 10 centuries.
"Are you an ambassador?"
came the question from behind him. Tibbix froze, his slender shoulders tensing. He turned slowly, the worry already bubbling in his chest at the possibility of being removed from this prime viewing position. His concern morphed instantly into something far more primal when he found himself staring at a towering reptilian being with crimson scales from head to toe. The creature stood at least 5 heads taller than Tibbix, with powerful limbs ending in curved talons and a long tail that swayed behind it. Most intimidating were the vertical pupils set in amber eyes that seemed to pierce right through Tibbix's thoughts.
Well, that is to say—"
Tibbix stammered, his universal translator struggling to keep pace with his nervous speech patterns. He considered fabricating credentials, but something in those penetrating eyes made falsehood impossible. His hesitation melted away, replaced by resignation.
"No,"
he admitted, his voice steadying.
"I'm merely an observer from Vendantis. Our official delegation is seated in the upper tiers. I simply wanted a closer view of the proceedings."
He gestured vaguely toward the magnificent stage.
"If my presence here is disruptive, I'll gladly return to my designated area."
The reptilian's scaled mouth curved into what Tibbix cautiously interpreted as a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth that somehow didn't seem threatening despite their obvious capacity for damage.
"I am Somir," the reptilian announced, "and you need not worry about your place here. In fact—"
Somir continued, shifting his massive frame to stand slightly behind and beside Tibbix.
"I'll ensure none of these brutes crush you by accident. The smaller species deserve to witness history as much as the rest of us."
He gestured toward the stage with a clawed hand.
"Observe as you wish, little one. These are momentous times."
Tibbix nodded gratefully, feeling unexpectedly safer in the shadow of the imposing reptilian. The crowd's restless energy seemed to intensify with each passing moment, and Tibbix found himself grateful for Somir's protective presence as various appendages and limbs continued to jostle around them.
"They say the humans are not afraid,"
Somir murmured, his voice barely audible above the din of the gathering.
"Is that true, do you think?"
Before Tibbix could respond, a series of melodic tones resonated through the chamber, signaling the imminent start of the proceedings. Tibbix activated his neural interface with a subtle eye movement, causing a translucent virtual display to materialize before him. The universal chrono display indicated that barely 2 minutes remained before the scheduled commencement of what might be the final mediation attempt between humanity and the collective. The tension in the chamber was crystal clear, manifesting differently among the diverse species present. To his right, a cluster of geyser were nervously rubbing their horns together, producing a faint harmonious vibration that, in their culture, was meant to ward off catastrophe. The sound would have been soothing under other circumstances, but now it only heightened Tibbix's anxiety. Nearby, a group of Ixis had abandoned their instinctual camouflage, a significant cultural taboo except in moments of extreme duress. Their naturally shifting skin patterns had frozen into patterns of black and white, the Ixi expression of existential dread. Tibbix had only read about this phenomenon in xenobiology texts. Witnessing it firsthand sent a shiver along his spine. A sudden hush fell over the assembly as 2 doors at opposite ends of the chamber silently parted, drawing Tibbix's attention to the stage again. The moment of reckoning had arrived. From the eastern portal emerged the representative of humanity. The human moved with the old confidence that had both fascinated and unnerved other species since their arrival on the galactic stage. He was of average height for his kind, perhaps 6 feet tall, dressed in those black and white clothes that humans loved. His short, tightly curled hair was peppered with grey, and his face bore the lines of what humans called middle age. Though Tibbix knew this particular human had lived through more than 2 centuries thanks to their species' unique medical advancements. The human, Theron, according to the official diplomatic registry, seemed unconcerned, perhaps too unconcerned considering how much was at stake for the galaxy. This was itself a statement. Humans regularly rejected the hierarchical displays common among most Confederation species, another of their complexing cultural quirks. From the western entrance came something fundamentally different. The collective's representative flowed into the chamber with his soft body. Though contained within a humanoid form for convenience, the being was fundamentally not an individual, but a localized node of a vast, interconnected consciousness. Its skin glistened with a mucus-like secretion, a mottled green and black that shifted subtly as internal communication coursed through its specialized cellular structure. Tentacle-like appendages, where a chin would be on most humanoid species, moved constantly, an external manifestation of the continuous communion with the greater collective consciousness. The being wore no clothing, as the collective considered artificial body coverings an insult to their evolved form. Instead, various tools and communication devices were embedded directly into its flesh, not added, but grown as part of the body itself through the collective's extraordinary biological engineering. The reactions throughout the chamber were immediate and varied, and it was hard for Tibbix to make sense of some of the strange displays of emotion. As both representatives approached their designated lecterns, the Uldarian mediator raised all 4 arms. The chamber's lighting dimmed, focusing attention on the stage.
"Esteemed representatives of the Galactic Confederation," began the Uldarian, "we gather today in the sacred tradition of peaceful resolution to address concerns that threaten our millennium of harmonious coexistence. I welcome Ambassador Theron of the Human Cooperative Territories and the voice of the Greater Collective."
The Uldarian turned first to the human.
"Ambassador Theron, we acknowledge your presence and invite your participation in this dialogue."
Then to the collective representative.
"Voice of the Greater Collective, we acknowledge your presence and invite your participation. With respect for your unified nature beyond individual identity."
Neither representative acknowledged the Uldarian's greeting. Instead, they regarded each other with what Tibbix could only interpret as mutual aversion. The human stood relaxed yet alert, while the collective representative's tentacles moved gradually faster. The silence stretched beyond diplomatic norms, creating an almost physical pressure in the chamber. Tibbix found himself unconsciously holding his breath, as were many of the delegates around him. Then, without preamble or acknowledgement of protocol, the collective representative turned away from both the human and the mediator, addressing the assembled delegates directly. "The rumors that have brought you all to this gathering are true," announced the voice. "After extensive synchronization across all nodes of our being, the collective has determined that the value of continued peace is inferior to the existential risk posed by unchecked human expansion throughout the galaxy." A wave of murmurs swept through the assembly. The Uldarian mediator stepped forward, expression serene but voice firm.
"Voice of the Collective, this forum is established for mediation between parties, not for unilateral declarations. Ambassador Theron has the right to equal speaking time, and all statements should be directed through this mediation to facilitate understanding."
The collective representative's tentacles flared momentarily, a gesture that xenolinguists interpreted as dismissive irritation. Meanwhile, the human ambassador remained impassive, watching the proceedings with an expression that Tibbix found difficult to interpret. Was it calm, boredom, strategic patience? Tibbix's mind raced with questions. What could have driven the collective to such a drastic position? The hive mind species had been among the most steadfast supporters of galactic peace for centuries. Their entire society was built around harmony and consensus. For them to determine that conflict was preferable to continued coexistence suggested either profound provocation or some fundamental shift in their collective consciousness. The voice of the collective turned toward the human ambassador. "You remain silent, human. Have you nothing to say in the face of your species' impending judgment?" Ambassador Theron maintained his composed stance, offering neither word nor gesture in response. His silence seemed to agitate the collective representative further, as evidenced by the accelerated motions of its chin tentacles. Ignoring the mediator's increasingly concerned expressions, the voice again addressed the assembly at large. "Since the human representative chooses silence, allow the collective to illuminate what brings us to this precipice." It began its speech, ignoring the warnings of the Eldarian mediator. "For the past 3 centuries, we have observed with growing concern the pattern of human expansion throughout the galaxy. Unlike every other spacefaring species who joined this confederation, humans have refused to adopt a centralized governance structure. Their so-called cooperative territories are, in fact, a chaotic patchwork of semi-autonomous colonies, corporate holdings, religious communes, and independent settlements." A holographic display materialized above the collective representative, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with human-inhabited systems highlighted in red. The distribution was indeed unlike the neat, organized territories of other species, instead showing a scattered, seemingly random pattern of expansion. "This non-centralized expansion," continued the voice, "marks a deeply troubling reality. Humans are not colonizing according to any rational plan or with regard for the delicate balance of galactic ecosystems. They spread to worlds that should, by all scientific consensus, be uninhabitable to their kind." The holographic display shifted to show various planetary environments, crushing gravity worlds, radiation-bathed moons, caustic atmosphere planets, with human settlements improbably thriving in each. Through what they euphemistically call artificial adaptation, humans have modified themselves to survive in environments that should naturally limit their spread. Some human colonies have genetically altered themselves so extensively that they can barely interbreed with their own kind from other worlds. This harmful and excessive diversity threatens the very concept of species stability that underpins our Confederation's founding principles. Tibbix noticed that some delegates were nodding in agreement, particularly representatives from the more biologically conservative species. A Lumorian diplomat nearby leaned toward a companion and whispered something that made both glance apprehensively at the human ambassador, who continued to observe the proceedings without visible reaction. The voice pressed on, its presentation growing more impassioned. "Most alarming is that humans remain fundamentally divided among themselves. Despite a millennium under Confederation influence, they continue to maintain distinct cultural, religious, and ideological groupings that frequently come into conflict. These conflicts rarely reach the threshold that would trigger Confederation intervention, yet they persist, sometimes for generations, creating perpetual instability within their territories." The display now showed historical footage of human disagreements, heated debates in their governance halls, protest gatherings on colonial worlds, competing scientific expeditions racing to claim new discoveries. Nothing that violated Confederation peace protocols, but decidedly unlike the ordered consensus-building practiced by most member species. "The only reason humans have not developed new weapons of mass destruction or engaged in large-scale warfare is the oversight of this very Confederation," the voice declared, tentacles now fully extended in what xenobiologists recognized as a display of maximum emphasis. "Yet at their current rate of expansion, with another millennium, humans will outnumber the combined population of all other Confederation species. The mathematical projection is irrefutable. Another holographic chart appeared, showing population growth curves extending forward in time. The human line eventually dwarfed all others combined, its exponential trajectory extending beyond the display's boundaries. The assembly's reaction was immediate. Fear and even some voices of agreement spoke in support of the hive. Encouraged by these responses, the voice continued its address. Humans claim worlds for reasons that defy rational analysis, because they find a planet's sunsets aesthetically pleasing, or because they have developed affection for a local non-sapient species, or simply because no other human has done so before. Their expansion follows no pattern recognizable to collective intelligence. They are, in essence, a chaotic force in an ordered cosmos. The holographic display shifted again, now showing a time-lapse of human expansion over the past 5 centuries. The pattern did indeed appear random, with colonies sprouting in seemingly arbitrary locations across multiple galactic arms. Most disturbing of all, the voice continued, ignoring both the Uldarian mediator and the quiet human ambassador, who made no effort whatsoever to interrupt it, is that humans harbor division among their own kind. They have established these different tribes throughout our galaxy, some based on historical Earth regions, others on ideological differences. Still others on arbitrary distinctions that even our most skilled xenopsychologists struggle to comprehend. A section of the assembly began murmuring in agreement. Tybbix noticed several Molosian representatives exchanging their equivalent of nods, their eye stalks vibrating in synchronized patterns of concern. "The collective has concluded," the voice pronounced, "that humanity represents an existential threat to the ordered development of all galactic life. Their chaotic, unpredictable expansion will inevitably destabilize the careful balance established over a millennium." A hush fell over the assembly. Even the ambient environmental systems seemed to quiet in anticipation of what would come next. The Uldarian mediator took a step forward, but the voice raised a limb in a gesture that unmistakably requested continued audience. "After careful deliberation across all nodes of our being," the voice declared, "the collective has determined that preventive action is necessary. For the past 3 centuries, we have secretly developed weapons that the Confederation long ago agreed to abandon." Gasps and exclamations erupted throughout the chamber. The Uldarian mediator's serene expression finally broke, revealing alarm.
"Voice of the collective, you speak of weapons. This is a violation of our most sacred—"
"Yes," interrupted the voice, its tone unapologetic. "We have created weapons. We have built ships designed not for exploration, but for destruction. We have prepared defenses against the human tide that threatens to consume all in its path." The chamber descended into chaos. Delegates of various species began shouting questions, expressions of outrage, or calls for calm. The Zyors' vibrations had intensified to the point where smaller delegates had to stabilize themselves against fixed objects. A group of Ixis had gone completely transparent, their most extreme stress response. Through it all, Ambassador Theron of humanity remained silent and still, watching the unfolding pandemonium with an expression that might almost be described as patient. The voice raised its appendages, waiting for the tumult to subside before delivering its final pronouncement. "The collective has determined that action must be taken before humanity grows beyond containment. We will act first to preserve the galaxy's future. Humans cannot be incorporated into the greater galactic harmony. They must be contained, by force, for the continuation of all other life." As the last echoes of this declaration faded, a new sound filled the chamber, unexpected, inappropriate, and utterly confounding to most species present. Laughter. human laughter. Ambassador Theron was laughing, not nervously or defensively, but with what seemed to be genuine amusement. His shoulders shook as the sound grew from a chuckle to full-throated laughter that filled the now silent chamber. The collective representative's chin tentacles froze in apparent shock. The Uldarian mediator looked between the two representatives in evident confusion. When the human's laughter finally subsided, he spoke for the first time, his voice carrying easily without technological assistance. "Let me get this straight," Ambassador Theron said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "You just admitted publicly, before representatives of every sapient species in the Confederation, that you've been secretly building weapons for centuries with the intention of using them against humanity?" He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with various delegates before returning his gaze to the collective representative. "And you know what is really funny? You seem to believe you actually stand a chance." The chamber fell into stunned silence at the human ambassador's words. Tibbix watched as the collective's tentacles writhed in what he recognized as their weird equivalent of indignation, while delegates from a dozen worlds exchanged alarmed glances. The human's laughter had shattered the somber atmosphere of impending war like a stone through glass. Ambassador Theron ignored their gazes and stepped away from his lectern, moving slowly toward the center of the stage. "Esteemed mediator," Theron said, addressing the Uldarian with a respectful nod. "I believe I'm entitled to equal speaking time as the voice of the collective. With your permission, I'd like to address the assembly and clarify a few misconceptions the collective hive mind struggled to understand despite their shared brain." The Uldarian mediator's grey skin had taken on a silvery sheen, a sociological response to stress among their kind. The entire proceeding had deviated catastrophically from the careful diplomatic choreography that had maintained peace for a millennium. This wasn't mediation anymore. It had become a public forum with potentially calamitous consequences.
Yes, Ambassador Theron,"
the mediator finally responded, his eyes focused on the surveying crowd.
"Equal time is your right under Confederation protocol."
The human nodded and turned to face the assembled delegates. Unlike the collective representative, who had used elaborate holographic displays, Theron stood alone, using nothing but his voice and presence. "Distinguished representatives of the Galactic Confederation," he began, his tone conversational rather than ceremonial. "You've just heard quite a speech. The collective has painted a rather alarming picture of humanity. Chaotic, unpredictable, fractious. And you know what?" He smiled. "They're absolutely right." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Tibbix leaned forward, straining to catch every word. "Humanity is exactly as described. Non-centralized, we claim planets because we like some exotic pets, and yes, sometimes contradictory in our approaches to problem-solving. But what the collective fails to understand, what they fundamentally cannot comprehend given their unified consciousness, is that these are not bugs in our system. They are features." Theron began to pace slowly across the stage, his movements relaxed but purposeful. "Do you know how difficult it was for humanity to maintain 1,000 years of peace? Not just with you," he gestured expansively to the entire assembly, "but with ourselves. The collective has offered you a snapshot of human history without context, so allow me to provide what they omitted." The human's expression grew momentarily somber. "Humanity's history on our homeworld was indeed drenched in blood. For thousands of years before we achieved spaceflight, we waged war upon ourselves without stopping. Tribe against tribe, nation against nation, ideology against ideology." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, particularly those from species with collective or hive-based social structures, who found the concept of interspecies warfare fundamentally disturbing. In less than a century on our home world, humans progressed from fighting with primitive chemical propellants to developing weapons capable of sterilizing entire continents. That early in our history, we had already invented weapons that would make the not-so-secret arsenal the collective is so proud of look like children's toys. The voice of the collective's tentacles flared in obvious anger, but Theron continued before they could interject. We fought world wars. We built and dropped atomic bombs on our own cities. We stood on the brink of complete self-annihilation multiple times, all because we couldn't figure out how to accommodate our differences. Theron paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembly. We nearly destroyed ourselves over resources, over ideas, over which group should dominate which. Tibbix felt a chill run through his body. He had studied human history as part of his xenological training, but hearing it described so directly by a human was entirely different from reading academic texts. And then, Theron continued, his voice softening, something miraculous happened. We reached the stars. We discovered that the universe was vast beyond comprehension, that there was room enough for every human idea, every human culture, every human belief system. We didn't need to fight over a single planet's limited resources anymore. We could each pursue our own vision without imposing it on others. The Ixis nearby had shifted from their stress coloration to a deep blue, the hue of contemplation in their emotional spectrum. The geyser had ceased their horn-rubbing entirely, transfixed by the human's words. That's why human expansion appears chaotic to the collective. It is chaotic, gloriously, beautifully chaotic. Some of us terraform worlds to make them Earth-like. Others genetically modify themselves to thrive in alien environments. Some establish democratic colonies, others corporate ventures, others religious communes. We don't need to agree on a single path forward, because space is big enough for all paths. Theron turned slightly to face the collective representative directly. And now you stand here, before the entire Confederation, and declare that this strategy, this miracle that saved humanity from itself, is somehow a threat? You claim that our lack of unity is dangerous, while admitting that you've been secretly building weapons to use against us? The voice attempted to speak, but Theron raised his hand in a sharp, cutting gesture that somehow managed to silence the collective representative mid-syllable. If we were truly the threat you describe, Theron continued, his voice hardening, if humanity was still the warlike species of our past, then you would not be standing here announcing your plans. You would not have had 3 centuries to build your weapons. There would have been no declaration of war. His eyes swept the assembly. There would have just been a flash of light, and your homeworld would have ceased to exist. Tibbix felt his inner membranes constrict at the casual way the human described planetary destruction. Around him, other delegates exhibited their species' equivalent of shocked silence. The Zyor had gone completely still, not even its breathing membranes moving. What the collective fails to understand, what they cannot understand due to their unified nature, is that humanity's peace with the galaxy and with itself is not maintained by force or by inherent gentleness. It is a daily choice we make, a choice our ancestors fought and died to give us. Theron walked slowly toward the collective representative, stopping just short of their position. Despite being physically smaller than the alien, the human somehow seemed to loom over it. Do you know what would happen if you actually proceeded with this war you're so eager to start? Theron asked, his voice almost gentle. You would succeed in doing what has not been done for 1,000 years. You would unite humanity. The voice's tentacles writhed in what might have been confusion or alarm. Oh, not in the way you think unity should work, Theron continued. We wouldn't suddenly adopt a hive mind or establish a single government, but we would remember something we've been trying very hard to forget, how to focus our minds into destructive purpose. The human turned again to address the wider assembly. Many of you represent species that evolved from collective or herd frameworks. Your ancestors survived by cooperation and consensus. That's beautiful and worthy of respect. He gestured toward himself. Humans evolved as persistence predators. Our ancestors survived by selecting a target and pursuing it until it collapsed from exhaustion, even if the chase took days. A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. Tibbix had known this academic fact about human evolution, but had never considered its implications in the context of war. From the expressions of those around him, neither had most of the other delegates. For 1,000 years, humanity has chosen not to be what evolution designed us to be. We have chosen cooperation over predation, friendship over dominance, coexistence over conquest. But all the collective sees is our lack of a unified leadership as a disorder. Theron's expression hardened. They are profoundly mistaken. The voice of the collective finally found an opportunity to interject, its speech patterns accelerated by agitation. You speak of choice and restraint, human, but my eyes saw that you too have created weapons. You have not fully embraced peace as you claim. Instead of appearing defensive, Theron laughed again, a shorter, sharper sound than before. Of course we have weapons, he replied. We've never denied it. The difference is that we haven't been building new ones. We haven't needed to. The arsenals we had when we joined the Confederation were already sufficient to end civilizations. We just had to maintain it. The revelation sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the assembly. The Eldarian mediator stepped forward, distress evident in their posture, but seemed unable to find words appropriate to the unprecedented situation. Humanity, Theron continued, his voice rising to be heard over the growing commotion, is the species that invented atomic energy and then, instead of using it first as a widespread power source, turned that same technology into weapons of destruction immediately. We are the species whose first application of faster-than-light technology wasn't to build exploration vessels, but to create missiles that could strike targets in other star systems before any defense could be mounted. Theron placed a hand on the shoulder of the collective representative, a gesture so inappropriate in formal diplomacy that several delegates gasped audibly. Tibbix himself couldn't believe what he was witnessing. This is the species you're proposing to go to war with, Theron said, his voice now quiet enough that the assembly fell silent to hear him. Do you truly want to be remembered as the ones who woke the sleeping predator? Who reset humanity to the factory settings and brought us back to what we were before we chose peace? The chamber fell into a silence so profound that Tibbix could hear the soft noise of the environmental system cycling air through the vast space. Every representative stood frozen, as if time itself had paused in the wake of the human's chilling words. Beside Tibbix, Somir had gone rigid, his massive scaled body becoming statue-like, only the slightest ripple of his breathing visible beneath crimson scales. The voice of the collective was the first to break the stillness, its tentacles writhing with renewed agitation. When it spoke, its tone had shifted from authoritative to defensive. The collective does not act alone in this matter, it declared, chin tentacles fluttering rapidly. We speak for all the species too weak or too diplomatic to voice their legitimate fears. Many worlds tremble in the shadow of humanity's potential for destruction. We are merely the first with courage enough to acknowledge the threat directly. This war is the desire of most of us. We are certain." Instead of appearing defensive, Theron laughed again, a shorter, sharper sound than before. The human's dismissive response seemed to drain some of the confidence the collective representative had mustered. The silence that followed was different, heavier, charged with unspoken fears and calculations. Tibbix glanced around at the assembled representatives and realized with sudden clarity that inaction now would allow this situation to deteriorate beyond repair. But why was no one speaking? Could he be the only one who noticed this? Without fully processing what he was doing, Tibbix turned to Sumir.
"Can you lift me up to the stage?"
he whispered urgently. The reptilian's amber eyes widened in shock.
"Have you lost your mind? You're an observer, not an ambassador. This is not your place to—"
"Please,"
Tibbix interrupted, surprising even himself with his boldness.
"No one else is going to speak, and this is going to spiral into disaster. I may not be an ambassador, but I am a citizen of the galaxy that actually has something to say."
Sumir studied him for several heartbeats before a slow, toothy smile spread across his scaled face.
"You have courage for such a small being,"
he rumbled, then bent down and offered his massive hands as a platform.
"I hope you know what you're doing."
With Sumir's help, Tibbix clambered onto the stage, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes turning toward him. His knees nearly buckled as the full attention of the Galactic Assembly focused on his diminutive form. His natural instinct, the evolutionary imperative of his species to hide, to blend in, to avoid attention, screamed at him to flee. Instead, he forced himself to walk forward until he stood between the towering human ambassador and the writhing representative of the collective.
"I am Tibbix,"
he began, his voice initially trembling before finding strength.
"An observer from Verdantis. My species is among the physically weakest in the Confederation. We have no natural weapons, no territorial instincts, and our greatest evolutionary advantage is our ability to hide."
He paused, gathering his courage.
"And yet, I stand here to tell the voice of the collective that you do not speak for us, nor, I suspect, for many others present."
Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly, emboldening Tibbix to continue.
"It is difficult to comprehend how a consciousness comprised of billions of connected minds could be so profoundly short-sighted,"
Tibbix said, his emerald skin flushing deeper green with emotion.
"Even I, with my single, limited mind, can see that the humans are not afraid of you, not even slightly. The evidence is right before us all."
He gestured toward Ambassador Theron, who watched him with interested surprise.
"They laugh at your threats, and they will obliterate you. Have you even considered what will the galaxy be like after this war?"
The voice's tentacles stilled as Tibbix continued.
"If you proceed with this, you will not be protecting the weaker species of the galaxy. You will be endangering us all by awakening what humanity has spent millennium trying to transcend."
Tibbix turned to address the entire assembly.
"I ask that my words be transmitted to all nodes of the collective consciousness. Perhaps when more of your unified mind considers the true implications of what you propose, wiser outcomes will prevail."
The collective representative stood motionless for several moments, its mucus-covered skin moving in strange patterns as internal communication flowed through its specialized cellular structure. The chin tentacles began to move, first erratically, then in synchronized waves that Tibbix had never observed in xenobiological studies. Finally, the voice of the collective looked around the chamber, its gaze moving from the impassive human to Tibbix and then to the representatives of 100 worlds standing in silent judgment. "The collective acknowledges," it said slowly. "The little one is not wrong, and we have misinterpreted the room and let our emotions get the best of us. We thank the little one for his perspective. If the esteemed mediator permits, the collective is willing to postpone any precipitous actions and engage in proper dialogue regarding our concerns. Should humanity still be willing to participate?" The Uldarian mediator's grey skin lightened with visible relief.
Ambassador Theron,
the mediator said, turning to the human.
Would you be amenable to such a discussion?
The human didn't laugh this time. Instead, he nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small smile as his gaze met Tibix's. Always, he said simply, his voice inviting what might as well become another millennium of peace.